streaming today. And the rest of this week, we have the amazing Emily Hammond, the CEO of Pod Scout. We are going strong on day three. I'm sorry. Yesterday was amazing. We worked on crafting our podcast pitch as a speaker. And now today we're going to talk about being a podcast host. So I am going to move out the way and further ado to let Emily do what she does. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you so much. All right, so today we're going to get started and we're going to talk about harnessing the power of the podcast. So yesterday we talked about podcast guesting. Today we're going to talk about what it means to be a host and the of this. Go ahead and share my screen. How's everybody doing this morning? All right. Okay, let's make sure. All right. So, just as we were talking about yesterday, there are essential elements of your marketing, and those go from branding to websites, social media, blogging, email marketing, podcasting, memberships, courses, and videos. And once again, we're going to be talking about podcasting, but this time from the perspective of being a host. And so, the first thing that we're going to do, I always just kind of introduce myself. My name is Emily. I've been in marketing and design for about 7 years now, and I really enjoy it. I enjoy helping people to bring a great design to their podcast or their brand, their website, social media, whatever it is. And I enjoy teaching them about good marketing practices. So definitely excited about today's session. So let's get started. So we talked about this a little bit yesterday with guesting, but what is the purpose for podcasting? Being a host, you have the same opportunities as if you are a guest, but it's a little bit differently. So you're going to gain followers for your podcast. You're going to get leads through this. You're going to have the opportunity to bring on people and interview them and kind of be that host and authority in the position of being a podcast host rather than the guest in this situation. So you're going to be building credibility. You're going to increase your SEO and once again replace in-person networking, because these are all great things that contribute to being a great podcast host and the advantages of it. Once again, 3.9 million podcasts are registered online. So you can be part of that community. It's such a whole new world when you go into podcasting because you don't know what to do. You may not know what equipment to use. You may not know what types of microphones. You don't know the kind of ins and outs of what should my cover look like? Who should I be bringing on? All those questions that people have, but there's a community of people who are doing just what you're doing. And some people have multiple podcasts. So that's a great way to learn, is just to listen to other people's, look and do the research. And we actually have something to share later on, which will be very exciting to help you with all of those things. So let's see. 166 million people listen regularly to podcasts, and 222 million have heard of podcasting. And if you're here yesterday, you're probably going to say, oh, this looks a little familiar. But yes, it does, because the same thing applies when you are a host. This is such a thing to keep in mind, that this is millions of people. And there are people out there looking for what you have to offer. And what if you say, well, what about my competitors? What about the people who know more than me? What about the people who have had such a, much longer experience than me? What about those who are better than me? But honestly, they don't have your brain. They don't have your experience. They don't have your insight into your industry. And so everybody thinks about things differently. We have a marketing podcast called the Absolute Marketing Podcast, and it's 2 minutes. We share actionable tips that we can share with our clients and others as well. So it's different because it's 2 minutes, but also we share our perspective and the things that we have learned. There's tons of marketing podcasts out there, and plenty of them have great information, but you want to make sure that you make yours unique and that you make it stand out, because like I said, No one has the same perspective that you do, and what you have to offer is valuable. The average podcast listener listens to 8 shows a day, and that is still so powerful to me because I listen to many podcasts a day. Let's put in the chat, how many podcasts do you guys listen to, if any at all? If it's 0, that's totally fine. This may be your intro into the whole podcasting world, but put in the chat and how many podcasts do you listen to a day or during the week on average? We got 4. That's good. Is this for a day or like for a week? What are we looking at here? Let's see. For a week. Okay, cool. Does anybody have any favorites? I know we were mentioning some yesterday as well. 5. Awesome. So see, you guys are already listening to podcasts. You already know the things that you like. And typically when I listen to a podcast, if I find something I like, I'll look for similar things. Usually in the like the Apple Podcasts app, it's usually what I use. You have related podcasts in the bottom, and you can look at those and see the similar styles or topics. And we got 2 a week. I listened to 4 during the week. That's great. And you guys are already taking in that information. So um, it's just awesome to see that, you guys understand that there is value from that. So you probably thought about making a purchase before, or you've heard about somebody that you're intrigued by. Oh, let me go to their website. Let me find out what they do. Let me investigate a little bit. So that's one of the advantages of being a host as well, because you are able to communicate those things differently than you would as a guest. As a guest, you can share things, but when you're a host, you have control of what you're putting out, the specific way that you're structuring the episode, if you bring people on, if you're just doing it by yourself. And one of the reasons that we started the 2-minute podcast is because people think it has to be super, super time consuming. But honestly, it doesn't really, because you have your editing process, you have your producing process, you have all these pieces that can fit together and not be stressful. So this says the honor of hosting, and my grandfather actually used to go to coffee club, and he would say, oh, you have the honor of buying, and that person would buy the coffee for everyone. So we just like to say you have the honor of hosting, and you are the host, so you're in control. You have that honor of that specific goal. All right, so why is being a host important? Because it gives you that control to organize your content and put it out to people. Now, that makes such a difference, because like I said, when you're a guest, you're kind of following that pattern, you're following what the person is, graciously allowing you to, be on their show, and you're there as a guest. But when you're the host, you have the opportunity to organize it how you like, and to invite people that you think would serve your audience well. So people have different podcasts and different forms. And the next question is, what is my agenda? This is very specific to you, because you might have the agenda of your purpose could be getting new clients, educating people. Your purpose could be just to have fun. Your purpose could be to inform people about a specific thing. It could be a very, 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 very specific podcast, or it could be super broad. So lots of people have different agendas when coming to the podcasting space, because they all have different goals. So who should I be interviewing? This is people that you're researching that could be part of your community, that can provide value for people that you know and your clients. And then also those who you've heard on other podcasts, and you're like, oh man, they would provide great information as well to my clients or my audience. When should I be posting? So this is depending on your time commitment as well, because if you have only a certain amount of time to post your podcast, edit, do all that production stuff, you want to make sure that you are setting out that time, that it's realistic for you. Because if you say, I'm going to post 2 podcasts a week, that's great. But at the same time, you want to make sure it's attainable for yourself. How should I promote it? You can promote it through social, email, any avenue that you have that's existing already. You've got kind of that flow. If you post on social media regularly, if you go on Instagram stories or reels or those kind of things, you can diversify your promotion of your podcast. And going back to the agenda as well, I wanted to mention that this is for your episode structure. So you've got your intro, you've got your body of content, and then you've got your outro and your closing. So you want to make sure you touch on those things. It's important to keep a set intro, a set outro, and change up the middle. So if you are producing your content, it takes a lot of work. But if you have your intro set, you have your outro set, you can insert that every time and it's the same. You know, if you've got music in there, if you've got special thing that you say every time. Also, structuring how you are going to put in your guests. If you're going to have them for a few minutes, then talk the rest of the time, really setting that structure for the episode. How are you going to choose your music for the experience, that kind of thing. We have a question. What is the intro and the outro for the podcast? Any examples? So an example could be for ours, we say, my name is Emily Hammond. You're listening to the Absolute Marketing Podcast. And then we start the episode, and it's whatever today's tip is or story or something that we are sharing for that episode. And then at the end, we will say, thank you for listening to the Absolute Marketing Podcast. If you'd like to learn more, please visit getabsolutemarketing.com. That's a very simple way to think about it, I guess. And lots of people have different ones. Sometimes people will start off their show every time, new, fresh start, new intro, and just do from start to finish and do their intro new every time. But it really depends on your preference and what you have time for. Another interesting thing to mention is commercials or sponsors. Some people have looked into getting commercials or sponsors for their podcasts, and that can be useful, but you want to make sure you figure out the structure of how you're going to put it in, going back to that agenda, planning out the structure of what you're going to say and what you're going to do. All right, so it's audit time again. We are going to look at someone's podcast. So if you have a podcast yourself, you can put it in the chat and we're going to take a look at your cover, your description, some different things that you've got in there. So I'll give you guys a minute and you can share it in. All right, so we've got Passion to Profits. Do you happen to have a link for that? And then we can go straight to it and I'll share my screen on that. Let's see. All right, let me pull up this one here. All right, awesome. Okay, all right. Our very own Teresa Gamble put in a link for her podcast. So let me share my screen and we'll take a look at what she's got here. All right, can everybody see? All right. So it looks like we've got Passion to Profits. We've got her name. It's under the business category. All right, so we've got her description here. There's 28 episodes in here. We got a cover, okay? We've got, this podcast is a hybrid blended platform of local, state, federal, and global resources, tips, strategies, subject matter experts, events, and more that will help you turn any passion to profits. We provide you with hidden gems of content that the public is not aware of, as well as consulting, coaching, connections to communicate your value to help cultivate your passion to profits. And then she goes on to talk about subscribe to the social media channels. Thank you for listening and sharing. All right. So the first thing that we want to look at is the description here. So usually when I go to look at a podcast, I want to know what it's about. For this one, there's lots of good stuff here, and obviously this podcast covers a lot, but we want to simplify it a little bit. So simplifying exactly what the podcast is going to be specifically talking about. So if somebody reads it, they'll think, oh, in a nutshell, this is what this podcast is about. So maybe reducing a little bit of these first two sentences here, just shrinking them down a little bit with the things that you're providing in the podcast, because obviously they know they're going to be getting different tips and strategies, but maybe just shortening it just a little bit, and then in the second sentence here, doing that as well. Um, Maybe even taking out, yeah, taking out the second half of this first sentence, kind of combining the two, I guess. And then when you say thank you for listening and sharing our podcast so we can learn and grow with each other, I would say you can put that in your outro, because when people are listening to it, or you can say it at the beginning when you start your episode, you can say, thank you for listening to our podcast. You can share this, with your friends or whoever. I think that would be a great way to kind of reduce that description, because if you want to say thank you, that's great. But also if they're hearing it from you, if they're hearing it in your outro or even your intro, if you say, oh, thank you for listening, then that's going to be a little bit more personal. So I think maybe taking out that part, and even when you say subscribe to our social media channels, you can say in your intro or outro or during your episode, oh, we have this on our social media. Make sure you go and check out these resources. And that way you're pointing it to them when they're listening to the episode, which will more likely catch on with them. All right, so we've got a good, looks like we've got a good title theme going on here. So you've got these conversation series, you've got Global GEW Week. All right, so it looks pretty good. All right, so we're going to move to the cover now. I think with this, shortening up this description, I think would make it more succinct and help people understand really what the podcast is about. So we're good there. Simplifying your cover a little bit would be great. This Passions to Profits podcast with Therese Gamble, host, passion pusher, coach. It's a little tiny. So I see your picture there, which is great. Having your picture on a podcast cover is awesome. But the writing is so tiny that I can't really see it. And if it was, on like the desktop, I can read it a little bit more. But if it's on a phone, like, so you want to make sure that your title is up front and center so that people can really see it and know what the podcast is about. So making that title bigger, also simplifying the background a little bit. There's lots of different elements here, but I think just simplifying and making sure that it's clear to read and that people can really see what's there. You've got some hearts here, you've got a phone and a laptop. And then also if you want it, the Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts, I feel like you can put those on your cover, but they're not usually necessary. You would put that in a more of a social post. So if you say, hey, listen to our podcast, you can find it at these places. You can put, the little logos. But on your cover, I don't think that it's, typically necessary, because people know, if there's a podcast out there, you can probably listen on Google, Spotify, and all those other places. All right, so just simplifying, because you've got great pieces here. We just want to clean it up just a little bit and to make it more, I guess, communicate the ultimate goal of the podcast. So that was a great example. Thank you so much, Teresa, for that. All right, so does anybody else have any podcasts they want to put in the chat? All right, so let me just check something here. Okay, so I'm going to show you something really quick. Give me one moment. All right. So Let me share my screen. All right. Oh, you're welcome, Teresa. And also, just to let everybody know, I know just as a disclaimer, whenever we are giving advice or I guess, giving constructive criticism, it's never anything, like against you or anything personal. It's just we want you to be super successful. So, there's a lot of great pieces that you guys do have. So we just want to make sure that you can be the best that you can be. So we're not saying, oh, this is bad or anything like that. So never worry about that. So, all right, let's see. It's not letting me share. Let me try this. There it is. Okay. Okay. Give me one moment. Can everybody see the screen or is it's going a little slow. I'm not sure what's happening here. Let me try it again. Let me know in the chat if you guys can see this. I'm not sure. Okay. Let me try this. I think this should work. Okay. Let me know if you can see this. Okay, cool. All right, so this is actually we are debuting our new podcast cover for the Absolute Marketing Podcast, and I wanted to show you a few key elements that we decided when we were designing the cover. So obviously we put our logo in here. Some people put their logo, some people don't, depending on if it's the name of their business or if it's something completely different. But typically you want to have your title of your podcast front and center, like I said. So my sister and I put our pictures on here because, like I said, when you put your picture on there, people are more likely to click on it, and it's just more personal and they see you, the host. So we've got our branding colors here, which is also very, very important, going back to the drawing board of when you create your brand. And if it's a strong brand, then that will shine through to all of the pieces of your marketing. So even when we were designing our podcast cover, we used our branding colors. We've got the signature green that we always wear that I'm also wearing now. So this is our new podcast cover. Just wanted to share that with you guys. And that was a little exciting piece that we've just recently designed. So once again, branding is very, very important. All right, I'm going to share my screen again, and we actually have some resources for you guys. So we are going to be sharing the Absolute Marketing Pro Toolkit as well as the PodScout Pro Toolkit. Yesterday we talked about the Google Podcasting Directory, which is another great place to find examples of podcasts that you like to help you figure out your hosting style and different things you want to incorporate. A big thing is research, and we have done a lot of it. So in sharing these toolkits with you, we want to provide the resources that we have found to be super helpful in our podcasting journeys. So I'm going to put the links below in the chat so you can go and take a look at those. And do we have any questions? We are coming to, I mean, you guys went through that so fast. You guys are understanding and you guys are smart. So, if we have any questions, this is kind of the Q&A part of it. We're going to do a little bit of dialogue, answer some questions you have. And I'll put the link for the toolkits in the chat. How long should our podcast episodes be? So it depends, like we were saying yesterday, it depends on your format, what you're talking about. If you have guests, Typically that takes a little bit longer, but also people do short interviews or they'll do a long interview and release certain sections of it. And it really depends on you because also goes back to that time commitment. Do you have the time to interview people? Do you have the time to edit and produce and all of those pieces? They all really work together. So setting those boundaries of I have this much time to devote and I'm going to spend this much interviewing. I'm going to do it solo. I'm going to choose, this music, that kind of thing. There's a lot of pieces that go into it. Somebody asked, what are those tools? So I'm going to put the link here for you. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. All right. Here is the Absolute Marketing Toolkit, and then I will bring you the PodScout Toolkit here. We got some other questions. What is the best way to record a speaker remotely for your podcast? Now, there are several different ways to do this. Some people will do Zoom. Some people will record on so many different platforms. It's really researching what is most intuitive for you to use. Most people do use Zoom, and you can also use platforms like Whereby, or there's a ton out there. I'm not sure if I don't think we have one in the toolkit, if I'm correct, but it just depends on also what the other person, the guest, is used to using as well. Sometimes if you're the guest, the person will send you a link. If you're the host, you can send them a link for whichever platform you find is best. There's so many out there. It's honestly just researching, like I said, and looking into what you want to use. Typically what we do with our podcast is a little bit different because it is 2 minutes. We don't do like an interview style. We have guest hosts come on. And if you've listened to the podcast before, that you'll be kind of familiar with that format. Let's see. How do you build your listenership for your podcast? Consistency and promoting yourself with that organic traffic. So the way that we market, we have a strong brand, we have our website, social media, we do blogs, and email. So you can promote your podcast through your email and your social, like I said. We also have the PodScout podcast, which is the Absolute Podcasting podcast. Lots of podcasting going on. We did that one in the form of a blog, so people could also read read the tips and the tools and understand what we're talking about. So we had another question here. What is the minimal amount of producing and editing required to produce a podcast besides adding intro and outro? The minimal amount, honestly, these things are very specific depending on if you have interviews, if you have, your format, but it really just varies. Some people can spend, up to an hour editing. Some people can spend up to an hour producing. Some people spend as little as 10 minutes. Depending on which editing and hosting software that you use, that also plays a key part. And we have some great resources in the toolkit for that. So if you take a look at those, you'll see which ones we recommend to cut down your time by a lot, no matter what your format is. And like I said, cutting down on that time as well, if you have an recorded intro and outro, that helps with breaking down that time of having to redo it every time. Let's see, do we have any other questions? What is the best podcasting platform? So is this from editing or hosting? Are we talking about Apple to Spotify to Google? Not really sure exactly. There's lots of podcasting. You're talking about hosting. So it depends, but we typically recommend Captivate. That is the one that we love and use. It is in the toolkit, and there's a link in there as well. Captivate is honestly a great hosting platform, and it allows you to do a lot of things. It does your distribution for you, so you can choose and connect Apple, Spotify, Google, and all those other ones. There's lots of them, but Captivate has so many flexible settings that you can use whenever you're going to schedule or just directly post your podcast episodes. All right. Is there any other ones? I mean, yeah, that pretty much concludes today's presentation. Can you clarify RSS feeds? So RSS feeds are they're basically, the purpose of them is to be it's sort of like imagine the RSS feed as a place where there's a process of coding it, but it will listen or whisper to your feeds, hey, there's a new blog post out, and it will send out that blog through your email. So it kind of is the middleman between when you schedule a blog post or a podcast, and it'll say, hey, go and post this over here, and it will put it out. What homework do we have to prepare for podcast pitch battle? Podcast pitch battle on August 28th. So I would just say to make sure you have a defined brand and look at the pieces of your podcast and your pitch and everything, and really analyze with all the tips that we've given. Look in the toolkit for some helpful resources, and really understand that, it is a process. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. So understanding that, just got to be confident and go into it strong. How can we get feedback from you? Well, that is partly the purpose of these boot camps. We're trying to give feedback to people. Obviously, we will be judges during the podcast pitch battle as well. So we will provide feedback that way. If people want to set up a one-on-one with us, that's also available. But typically, in formats like this, we try to give the best feedback in real time. All right. Yes, I think that concludes today's presentation. If we have anything else, Teresa, did you want to add or come up and conclude our meeting today? Let's see. Can you guys hear me too? I think my microphone went on mute. All right, so if anybody doesn't have any more questions, I think we are good to go. Teresa, if you want to add anything, I think we're good. All right, so everybody, thank you for coming. You're welcome. If there's nothing else, I think Teresa, do we just sign off here? All right. All right, it looks like we are good to go. Thank you everybody for coming, and I hope that this was helpful for you. Everybody have a great day.